How much do you trust a dog's warning? Especially when the world says there's nothing to fear. It was just another sunny morning in small-town Indiana until Officer Ryan Carter pulled up to Little Leaf Daycare. Parents hurried past with coffee. Kids laughed on the playground. But one voice cut through the calm. Ranger, a German shepherd, barking his heart out beneath a crooked old maple. To everyone else, it sounded like a nuisance. But for Ryan, a veteran K9 handler, that bark meant one thing: danger, somewhere close. What he discovered beneath the playground would shatter a community's peace and prove that sometimes listening to a dog's instincts can save lives. Stay with us, because this story will change how you see trust, family, and the heroes who walk on four legs. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb, tires crunching against the faded bricks of the old street. Parents' cars lined the block, backpacks and lunchboxes visible through windows. But there was no mistaking the commotion out back. The sharp, relentless barking that echoed over the fence, cutting through the hum of cicadas. He rounded the corner, badge glinting. And there he was. Ranger. The German shepherd stood rigid, hackles bristling along his back, barking his head off at a spot in the shade beneath a bent maple tree. Not just any bark either. This was a warning, full-throated, teeth flashing, the kind that said, "Something's wrong, pay attention." A group of kids stood huddled at the far side of the yard, eyes wide, clutching each other's hands. Miss Linda Beckett, the daycare owner, fluttered at the door, her face a mix of concern and embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Officer Carter," she called, her voice high and tight. "He just won't stop. I tried to get him inside, but—" She trailed off, helpless. Ryan crouched beside Ranger, feeling the old ache in his knees, memories of desert dust and midnight patrols flashing in his mind. "Easy, boy," he murmured, running a steady hand down Ranger's flank. Ranger whined, pawing at a patch of earth where the grass grew sickly, yellowed and thin. His nose pressed to the ground, then shot up, barking again, more desperate. For a split second, Ryan wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to leftover trauma, the dog's or his own. But that old lesson from Iraq echoed in his mind. Trust the dog's nose. Dogs knew things humans refused to see. "What's got into you, huh?" he said softly. Then louder, for Miss Beckett's benefit, "Did you change anything back here? New landscaping? Sprinkler system?" She shook her head, eyes darting to the patch of ground. "No, we did some work on the fence a month ago, but that's it. He's never acted like this before." One of the daycare staff, Megan Price, a nervous 20-something with a ponytail and bitten nails, edged closer. "He's been barking at that spot all week, officer. Yesterday he scratched so hard his paws bled. I thought maybe a raccoon had died under there or something." Ryan straightened, scanning the playground. Ordinary in every way. Plastic slides, wooden swing set, faded chalk drawings, but Ranger refused to budge. Ryan's own heart thumped faster, the old adrenaline surge kicking in. He could almost feel his squad leader's voice in his ear, back in Mosul. "Don't ignore the dog, Carter. If you hesitate, people get hurt." He glanced at Miss Beckett, weighing his options. Should he really dig up a playground on a hunch? The risk of looking foolish in front of half the neighborhood pressed on him. He could hear the gossip already. Ryan Carter, losing it since the war, letting that dog run the show. Still, he trusted Ranger more than his own instincts. "Can I borrow a shovel?" he asked, forcing a calm he didn't feel. Miss Beckett hesitated, then nodded, disappearing inside. The parents' cars seemed to inch closer, windows rolled down, faces anxious. Ranger's agitation only grew, pacing and circling, claws raking the earth. Kids watched in wide-eyed silence, sensing the tension in the adults' voices. Megan shot Ryan a worried glance. You think it's serious? I don't know, Ryan admitted, but I've learned not to ignore a dog like this. He knelt, tracing the patch with his fingers, cool, damp, the soil oddly loose beneath the surface. The smell was faint but unmistakable. Not decay, but something off. A chemical tang, like old bleach. Miss Beckett returned, breathless, handing over a battered garden spade. Are you sure about this, officer? Ryan dug. The spade bit into soft earth, turning over sod that peeled away too easily. The children pressed closer to the fence, parents joining them now, cell phones raised. Sweat beaded on Ryan's brow as he dug deeper, hitting something solid, a layer of warped wood. A strange hush fell. Ranger whined, pawing beside him, frantic. Ryan cleared more dirt, revealing the edges of a trapdoor. Hinges rusted but not ancient. Megan gasped, hands flying to her mouth. We have a cellar? I never knew. He exchanged a look with Miss Beckett, whose face had drained of color. The air around them seemed to thicken, as if the whole town was holding its breath. We're going to need backup, Ryan said, voice steady, though inside he felt the same old dread. The sense that they just tripped a wire with no idea what would happen next. As he reached for his radio, Ranger let out one final, triumphant bark, a sound of both warning and hope. Ryan realized, as the first sirens wailed in the distance, that this wasn't just another call. It was the beginning of something that would shatter the quiet heart of Lebanon, Indiana, and challenge everything he thought he knew about family, trust, and survival. And somewhere, beneath the old maple tree, secrets waited to be unearthed. The morning heat pressed down on the playground as more officers arrived, blue lights swirling against the white siding of Little Leaf Daycare. Ryan's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good, as he knelt beside the trapdoor. Ranger remained glued to his side, chest heaving, eyes never leaving the rough wooden hatch now revealed to a stunned crowd. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, as if even the birds in the trees were waiting to see what would crawl out of the darkness beneath their feet. Officer Denise Hale, Ryan's partner and a sharp-eyed mother of 3, hustled through the gate, notebook in hand. What are we looking at? She asked in a low voice, glancing at the frightened faces pressed to the chain-link fence. Ryan shook his head. We don't know yet, but the dog's been on it for days. I've got a feeling. Miss Beckett hovered nearby, wringing her hands. I swear I had no idea there was anything under there. I just bought the place last year. The inspector said the basement was sealed. Ryan cut her off gently, aware of the tremble in her voice. We're not blaming you. Let's just see what's down there. He tried to sound calm, but every instinct screamed danger. His army training came roaring back. Assume nothing. Prepare for anything. Together, Ryan and Denise brushed off the last of the dirt, exposing a rusted latch. The air around the trapdoor was cooler, damp, and heavy, with a sour, chemical tang. The assembled crowd, a mix of parents, staff, and curious neighbors, had fallen silent. The only sound was Ranger's low, insistent whine. Denise knelt and tested the latch. It resisted at first, then popped free with a groan. Ryan drew his flashlight, the old maglite still etched with desert sand from a world away, and shone it down the narrow opening. Stale, earthy air drifted up. Shadows writhed along brick walls, rough and crumbling, the floor barely visible. Basement's real, all right, he muttered. Miss Beckett shivered. I never saw any plans for a cellar. No access from inside. We just thought it was old plumbing, sealed off decades ago. Ryan looked at Denise, reading the same worry in her eyes. I'll go first. He moved to the edge, heart thundering, and swung his legs into the darkness, Ranger pressing against him. Denise followed, weapon drawn. The space below was barely tall enough to stand, walls clammy and marked with water stains. At first, Ryan saw only debris, broken chairs, a bag of potting soil, old buckets stacked in the corner. Then his light flicked over something else. Tiny shoes scattered by the far wall, a faded teddy bear lying on its side, and in the farthest corner, a lump that shifted when the beam touched it. He froze. "There's someone down here." Denise's voice cracked. "Kids, 2 of them." Ryan rushed forward, heart pounding so hard it felt like thunder in his ears. Huddled in the shadows, pressed tight against each other, were 2 children. A little boy with blonde curls, maybe 4 years old, and an older girl, thin as a twig, her knees drawn up to her chin. They stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. Ranger whimpered and crawled forward, tail low, his presence gentle and inviting. The girl flinched at first, but didn't pull away when Ranger nuzzled her hand, his tongue lapping at her fingers. Denise knelt beside them, whispering, "You're safe now, honey. We're here to help." But the children only shrank deeper into the corner, silent as stones. Ryan checked them quickly, cold to the touch, clothes damp with sweat and fear, but alive. He called up to the daylight, his voice ringing with hope and horror. "We've got kids! Call for EMS now!" Chaos erupted above. The trapdoor yawned open as paramedics hurried ropes and stretchers down. Cameras appeared at the fence, neighbors wept, and police radios crackled with urgent voices. Ryan cradled the boy, Mason, he would later learn, while Denise gently coaxed the girl, Harper Lynn, into her arms. Ranger never left their side. The shepherd pressed close, his warmth steady, a silent promise that nothing bad would happen now. The little boy clung to Ranger's fur as if it were the last thing anchoring him to the world. The children were whisked into ambulances, blankets wrapped tight. Ranger riding with them. Reporters snapped photos as the convoy pulled away, sirens splitting the morning calm. Parents gasped and hugged their own children, unable to imagine the terror of waiting days in the dark, not knowing if help would ever come. Back inside the daycare, Ryan and Denise swept the rest of the basement. Signs of recent activity were everywhere. Fresh footprints in the dust, empty water bottles, discarded snack wrappers. Near the trapdoor, Ryan found a half-buried duffel bag stuffed with children's pajamas, small shoes, and an old phone missing its battery. Chills prickled his skin. This hadn't been an accident. The news hit the town like a bomb. By noon, the Little Leaf daycare was closed. Yellow tape stretched across the playground, TV vans jamming the street. Social workers arrived, asking gentle questions that got no answers. The children remained mute, eyes always searching for Ranger. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was it a kidnapping? An inside job? Some whispered about Miss Beckett's past. Others eyed the daycare staff with suspicion. Theories flourished, each more lurid than the last. Through it all, Ryan stood in the chaos, exhausted, every nerve on edge. Megan Price, the staff member who'd first noticed Ranger's behavior, approached him quietly, her eyes red from crying. "Officer Carter," she whispered, "I know something's wrong here. I think I need to tell you what I saw." But before he could answer, his radio crackled again. Media requests, headquarters demanding updates, parents begging for reassurance. Ryan looked down at his hands, stained with playground dirt, and something far older. The knowledge that sometimes, even the safest places could hide nightmares. And always, Ranger waited by his side, the town's hero, ready to face whatever secrets still lingered in the shadows. The town of Lebanon felt different after the rescue. The news spread faster than wild clover. By midday, The Little Leaf daycare had become a flashpoint for every parent's worst fears, the epicenter of a story that no one wanted to believe could happen in a place like this. The front lawn swarmed with reporters, police tape fluttering in the breeze, television cameras panning across the old Victorian house. But inside the hospital, behind heavy doors and guarded whispers, the real drama was unfolding. A quieter, more painful kind of reckoning. Ryan Carter didn't sleep that night. He sat in the hallway outside the children's room, his uniform jacket folded over the chair, Ranger curled at his feet. He'd always thought of hospitals as liminal spaces, places between worlds, hope and grief suspended in sterile air. On the whiteboard outside the room, someone had written their names, Mason and Harper Lynn. Their parents were missing. No one had yet claimed them. Their only comfort was Ranger, whose calm, steady presence seemed to cut through the clinical coldness better than any medicine. Harper Lynn, the older of the two, lay rigid in her bed, refusing to speak, eyes following every shadow that moved on the wall. Mason clung to the edge of the sheets, knuckles white, flinching at every footstep. The doctors murmured about shock and trauma, about the time it could take for the children to come back to themselves, if they ever did. Ryan felt the old ghosts stirring. He flashed to another hospital, another place, sand and mortar rounds outside the window, the faces of children he could not save. He reached for his notebook, the battered leather one he'd carried since the army, and began to write, a letter to his brother Mark, killed in Mosul 5 years before. He wrote about the town, about the secrets that seemed to live in the shadows of its most innocent places. He wrote about the children's silence, how it mirrored the silence that sometimes gripped him at night. Was he doing enough? Was he still that soldier, that protector, or just a man clinging to a dog and a badge in a world he no longer fully trusted? Late in the afternoon, Megan Price arrived. She looked out of place in the polished corridors, her staff badge still clipped to her faded cardigan. She hovered in the doorway until Ryan waved her in. "You wanted to talk," he said, voice gentler than he felt. Megan glanced nervously at the children, then back at Ryan. "I haven't been able to sleep. I keep thinking about what happened, about what I saw the week before." She hesitated, wringing her hands. Miss Beckett had these men come by late one evening. She said they were fixing a pipe in the basement, but it was weird. They never came through the front door. I saw them go around back with tools and boxes. She got really upset when I asked about it. Ryan took notes, his mind ticking through possibilities. "Did you recognize any of them?" "No. One was tall, had a big scar on his jaw. The other was older, balding, carried a clipboard. They left just before midnight. After that, the back door was always locked, and she kept saying the basement was off limits. For renovations, she said." Ranger shifted, nose twitching, as if catching the scent of a memory. Ryan pressed. "Anything else?" Megan's eyes darted around, fearful. "A couple times I thought I heard voices down there. I figured it was just Miss Beckett talking on the phone, but the last week, it was different. Sometimes the lights flickered and the power went out in just that part of the house. She'd snap at me if I tried to reset the breakers." Ryan felt his frustration grow. He glanced at Harper Lynn, whose hand now rested quietly on Ranger's back. The dog didn't move, content to be a living anchor. Outside, the storm of media grew wilder. Social services arrived, asking questions that had no easy answers. Who left the children down there? How long had they been missing? Why had no one reported it sooner? Parents demanded accountability. The mayor made a brief statement calling for transparency and healing. Inside, the kids stayed silent, their wounds too deep for words. Ryan's own wounds reopened. That night he met with Dr. Ana Morales, a therapist who ran a support group for veterans. They walked the quiet corridors as he spoke, his words coming in starts and stops, like a man learning how to talk again. "It's the silence," he admitted. "These kids, they remind me of myself after Mosul. People think the worst part is the violence, the explosions. But it's what comes after. The quiet, the looks, the way nobody knows what to say. I see it in their eyes." Dr. Morales nodded, her voice low. "Sometimes, the best thing we can do is just be there. Let them see we're not leaving. Dogs are good at that." Ryan smiled, a small, grateful thing. "Ranger's always known what to do, even when I don't." Later, he found Megan in the parking lot, shivering in the late summer air. She confessed another secret, her voice trembling. "I think Miss Beckett was getting money from somewhere. She'd get calls from a man named Avery, said he was with a real estate group. But the way they talked, it made my skin crawl." Ryan's instincts prickled. There was more here, a web of secrets tangled through the heart of Lebanon, hidden under the guise of renovation and community progress. Before dawn, Ryan returned to the hospital room. He found Mason and Harper Lynn curled together in the narrow bed, Ranger lying watchful between them. For a brief moment, all was quiet. The fluorescent light buzzed, and the world outside seemed very far away. He sat and wrote another entry in his journal, his hand steady, his heart bruised but unbroken. He promised himself, and Mark, and these children, that he would not stop until the truth was unearthed, no matter how deep it was buried. And as the sun rose, painting the sky over Lebanon in shades of pink and gold, Ranger lifted his head, ears pricking. There were still secrets to uncover, but for now, the children slept safe, and hope, however fragile, had returned to the heart of a wounded town. The mood in Lebanon shifted from shock to suspicion as the days crawled forward. People talked in hushed tones in the grocery aisles and at church suppers, glancing over their shoulders as if afraid the very walls might be listening. Parents clutched their children tighter. The Little Leaf daycare, once the pride of Main Street, now sat cordoned off, windows dark, a closed for investigation sign nailed across the porch. But beneath the stillness, secrets churned, threatening to drag the whole town under. Ryan spent long hours reviewing the case files and walking the grounds with Ranger, the German shepherd's nose pressed to every crack and crevice as if searching for ghosts. But it was Megan Price who brought the first real break in the case. A break that would crack open everything Ryan thought he knew about Lebanon. Megan came to the station late on a rainy afternoon, soaked through and shivering, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She sat across from Ryan in the interview room, twisting a napkin between her fingers. "I can't stop thinking about it," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw something weeks ago. Something I should have reported. There was a man, maybe in his 40s, with gray hair and a limp. He met Miss Beckett in the alley behind the daycare one night. They talked for a long time, arguing. I heard the word contract. I think he was some kind of contractor, but it didn't feel right." Ryan leaned forward. "Did you recognize him?" "No, but his van had a logo on the side. Golden Harvest Properties. I looked it up later. They've been buying properties all over town." The name sent a ripple of unease down Ryan's spine. He remembered the glossy brochures in the mayor's office. Golden Harvest, revitalizing Lebanon for the next generation. But now, the words sounded ominous, like a cover for something darker. Ryan pressed for details, Scribbling notes, Megan described late-night deliveries, renovations that never seemed to end, and Miss Beckett's growing anxiety. She changed after those meetings, Megan said. Started locking doors, snapping at staff. I heard her crying in her office once. I thought about quitting. The investigation turned a corner. Ryan and Denise pulled property records and discovered that Golden Harvest had quietly acquired not only the daycare but also the old St. Anne's Methodist Church next door. It seemed innocent enough, until Ranger's instincts got involved. That evening, rain still drumming on the cruiser roof, Ryan and Ranger parked outside St. Anne's. The church had been closed for repairs for months, a coming soon sign promising a new community center. Ryan walked the perimeter, flashlight beams slicing through the gloom, while Ranger tugged at his leash, insistent. They circled the church, the only sounds the slap of rain and the click of Ranger's nails on broken pavement. Near the back, Ranger stopped dead, nose pressed to a crawl-space door half hidden by weeds. He barked once, sharply, then started to dig. Ryan knelt, pulling away tangled vines. The door groaned open, revealing a cramped space beneath the old sanctuary, damp, littered with debris and broken hymnals. But what caught Ryan's eye was a child's toy, a plastic fire truck, its wheels caked in mud, wedged deep in the corner. He bagged the toy for evidence, heart racing. Why would a child's toy end up here? Was it left behind by a construction crew, or something far more sinister? Ryan's mind churned with possibilities as he drove back through the rain. The town's old wounds seemed to be bleeding into the present, every answer bringing more questions. That night, alone at home, Ryan tried to make sense of it all. He called Dr. Morales, the therapist, and let the walls down. It's getting personal, he admitted, voice tight with exhaustion. This case, it's not just about those kids. It's about all of us. I keep thinking about Mark, how he always said the hardest battles are fought in places you thought were safe. Dr. Morales listened quietly, then said, "You're not alone, Ryan. You're allowed to care. That's what makes you good at this." He wanted to believe her, but the old doubts gnawed at him. Was he letting his own scars cloud his judgment? Or was the town itself guilty of willful blindness, choosing comfort over truth? The next morning, police brought Miss Beckett in for questioning. She arrived with her lawyer, lips pressed tight, hands trembling. She denied everything, said the contractor was just for repairs, that the basement was sealed, that she had no idea how the trapdoor opened. But the financial records told a different story. Large, unexplained deposits from Golden Harvest, routed through a web of shell companies. Ryan watched her closely, searching for cracks in the facade. Was she a pawn or a player? The stress showed in her eyes, but the answers remained just out of reach. Meanwhile, word spread that the church crawlspace was being searched. Parents whispered about the toy, fueling new rounds of panic. The town's sense of safety seemed to erode with every headline. That afternoon, as Ranger napped by Ryan's desk, Megan returned. She looked stronger now, less afraid. "If you need me to testify, I will," she said quietly. "I can't keep secrets anymore." Ryan nodded, grateful. He realized that the lines between victim and witness, bystander and hero, were blurring for everyone involved. As dusk fell over Lebanon, the town huddled in its houses, waiting for the next revelation. Ryan drove the empty streets, Ranger by his side, both of them searching for answers. In the rearview mirror, the daycare and the church loomed, old buildings full of new shadows. He wondered what other secrets lay hidden beneath the surface, and if the truth, when it finally came, would heal the town or tear it apart. By the end of that week, the story had exploded. Lebanon, once a sleepy Midwestern town, was now the focus of a media circus. Satellite vans lined Main Street. News anchors braved the drizzle in front of the shuttered daycare, their voices sharp with urgency. But beneath all the noise, a deeper current of fear and suspicion ran through the town. Everyone wanted answers, but most of all, they wanted someone to blame. Inside the police station, the investigation shifted gears. Ryan and Denise set up a task force, tacking maps and photographs to the squad room wall. They built timelines, traced property transfers, and scrutinized every name connected to Golden Harvest properties. The further they dug, the more tangled everything became. Financial records showed that Golden Harvest had acquired not just the daycare and the church, but several other struggling businesses on the edge of town. Laundromats, a shuttered motel, even an empty warehouse out by the interstate. Late one night, as rain battered the windows, Denise tossed a folder onto the conference table. "Look at this. Golden Harvest's biggest investor is a shell corporation, Delaware-based, classic cover. But here's the real kicker. Town Councilman Gerald White signed off on every one of these property sales. He's been pushing these deals at City Hall for years." Ryan's jaw tightened. He remembered campaign signs. White, smiling, promising renewal and progress. Now those words felt hollow, almost mocking. "We need to bring him in for questioning," Ryan said, voice low. But before they could move, the threats started. It began with an anonymous letter slipped under Megan's apartment door. The message was simple: "Drop it or else." No signature, just block letters cut from a magazine, glued to the page. The next morning, Ryan found a similar note in his mailbox at the station. Denise got a threatening voicemail warning her to mind your own business if you want your family safe. For Megan, the threats were almost too much. She called Ryan, voice shaking. "I'm scared. What if they're watching me? What if they know where I live?" "You're not alone," Ryan promised, heart pounding. "We'll get you protection." He spent hours sitting outside her apartment in his cruiser, Ranger beside him, watching for any sign of trouble. But the danger wasn't just empty threats. One evening, as Megan left work, she spotted a white van idling at the curb. No plates, windows blacked out. She ducked behind a parked car and called Ryan, voice tight with fear. "It's back. The van's back. I saw it last night too, following me from the store." Ryan raced across town, adrenaline surging. He arrived just in time to see the van lurch away from the curb. Ranger, nose to the wind, leapt from the cruiser and barked, the sound echoing through the night. Ryan and Denise chased the van through back streets, headlights slashing across dark alleys, finally cornering it behind the old bowling alley. Inside, they found more than they expected. A duffel bag filled with kids' toys, a stack of cell phones, a ledger with lists of names and dates. Hidden under the floor mat was a digital camera, memory card still inside. The evidence pointed to a larger, more chilling operation, a child abduction ring using properties bought by Golden Harvest as safe houses. Ryan's hands shook as he bagged the evidence. Denise scanned the ledger, her face blanching as she recognized names. Kids from town, some missing for years, others marked with check marks next to their names. Megan's name appeared too, scrawled in the margins with the word "witness" circled. The realization hit hard. This was bigger than one daycare, bigger than Miss Beckett or Gerald White. Someone was coordinating all of it, using the trust of the town as a shield. The news broke like a storm. Local stations picked up the story first, then regional, then national. Hashtags trended overnight. Parents held their children close, some pulling them out of school and daycare altogether. The mayor called for calm, but his words did little to soothe the rising panic. At the hospital, Mason and Harper Lynn remained silent, still refusing to speak, but clinging tightly to Ranger whenever he visited. The dog's fame grew with the story. Photographs of him sitting watch by the children's bedsides made the rounds online, drawing messages of support from across the country. For a town desperately in need of hope, Ranger became a symbol, a reminder that someone, something, still cared, still fought for the innocent. Meanwhile, Ryan and Denise pressed on. They interviewed Gerald White, who denied everything, sweat beading on his brow as he stammered through his answers. I just approved the deals. It was for the town's future, I swear." But the evidence mounted. Bank transfers linked White to payments from Golden Harvest, routed through offshore accounts. Investigators traced calls from the councilman's office to numbers found in the van. Denise's face grew grimmer with each new discovery. The threats escalated. Another letter arrived, this time warning Megan to keep quiet or disappear. One night, someone slashed Ryan's tires outside his apartment. Ranger growled at shadows that crept too close to their door. The police chief doubled security for everyone involved, but paranoia set in. Some townsfolk turned against Ryan and his team, muttering about troublemakers and outsiders stirring the pot. But others rallied, bringing food and coffee to the station, leaving flowers for the children at the hospital, posting signs that read, "We believe our heroes." Through it all, Ryan clung to his promise. He would not back down. Not for himself, not for Megan, not for the kids who still needed justice. As the media swelled and social media lit up with outrage and hope in equal measure, Ryan made a vow in the quiet of his squad car, one hand on Ranger's head. Whatever it took, they would bring the truth to light. No more secrets, no more hiding, and somewhere in the tangled heart of Lebanon, the real mastermind watched and waited, plotting their next move, as the battle for the soul of the town entered a dangerous new phase. Night crept over Lebanon, bringing with it a tension that felt almost electric. Patrol cars circled neighborhoods in slow loops, headlights slicing through fog, as the police braced for what everyone now whispered about: a confrontation. Officer Ryan Carter could barely sleep, his mind alive with possibilities and danger. Ranger seemed to sense it too. Pacing the living room, ears pricked, nose constantly testing the air. Every phone ring sent Ryan's pulse racing. At the precinct, Megan Price sat with Denise in a small office, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she barely touched. The threats had grown bolder. The last text read, "You're next. Stay out of it." Megan's voice trembled. "I can't even walk my dog without looking over my shoulder. If it weren't for you guys, I'd have left town already." "We're not letting anything happen to you," Denise said. But even she sounded tired, shadows under her eyes. The team was stretched thin, watching suspects, combing through leads, and racing the clock as the story became headline news across the state. That night, just after midnight, Megan's phone rang. The number was blocked, the voice on the line crisp and professional. "Megan Price? Detective Sanders, State Police. We need you to come to the old grain silos off Highway 32. We have a witness in protective custody who can corroborate your testimony about Beckett. This can blow the case wide open, but you have to come now, quietly, for your own safety." Megan's hands shook. She wanted to believe it, wanted so badly for this nightmare to end. She grabbed her jacket and keys, scribbled a note for her roommate, and slipped out into the night. But as soon as her car rolled down the dark county road, doubt crept in. The silos were abandoned, miles from town. No police lights waited. She parked on gravel, heart hammering, phone in her fist. From the shadows, a figure stepped out, a tall man, face hidden by a baseball cap. "You Megan Price?" he called. His tone was wrong, too casual, too harsh. Megan took a step back, phone ready to dial 911, when another car roared up behind hers, blocking her escape. Panic surged. She started running, gravel flying under her shoes. The man chased her, swearing. Just as he caught her arm, headlights blazed at the edge of the field. Ryan's cruiser, siren silent, but lights flashing. Ranger barking from the back seat. Ryan leapt out, gun drawn, voice booming across the empty field. "Police, let her go now!" Denise jumped from the other door, her weapon trained. The man shoved Megan aside and sprinted for the silos. "Stay with Megan!" Ryan barked, letting Ranger loose. The dog shot across the ground, muscles rippling, a flash of black and tan in the moonlight. Ranger's growl cut through the night, echoing off rusted metal. The suspect scrambled through weeds, breath ragged, but Ranger was faster. In seconds, the dog tackled the man, pinning him with powerful jaws and a deep, unyielding bark. Ryan and Denise closed in, cuffs snapping shut, the man's curses swallowed by the wind. Megan stood trembling, her back pressed to the cruiser, tears streaming down her face. "He said he was a cop," she gasped. "He knew everything." "How did he know?" Ryan glanced at Denise. "They're monitoring us. Somebody's been leaking information from inside the department." His anger burned, a mix of betrayal and resolve. "We'll lock it down. No more chances." Back at the station, the suspect was identified as Tom Avery, an ex-pastor who'd been working with Golden Harvest Properties for over a year. His fingerprints matched those found on the trapdoor at the daycare and in the crawl space beneath St. Anne's Church. Under questioning, Avery broke. He named Miss Beckett, Councilman Gerald White, and several other town insiders as part of a larger ring trafficking children through properties bought cheap and renovated to hide their true purpose. Within hours, search warrants flew. SWAT teams stormed houses and offices. Gerald White was arrested at his home, protesting his innocence even as the news cameras rolled. Miss Beckett was found trying to buy a one-way bus ticket out of state, her suitcase packed with cash. By dawn, the police had a half-dozen suspects in custody, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like justice might actually win. But the cost was heavy. Megan's life would never be the same. She wept with relief as Denise hugged her outside the interview room, and parents from all over town called to thank her for her courage. Social workers and detectives, inspired by Megan and Ranger's heroics, redoubled their efforts to track down missing children and close the loopholes that had let this nightmare fester. A candlelight vigil sprang up outside the hospital. Mason and Harper Lynn's parents, now found and reunited with their children, thanked Ryan and Ranger in a tearful interview on the local news. Ryan found himself at the center of it all, people clapping his back, Ranger sitting tall at his side, police and press alike calling the German Shepherd a hero. That night, the city council held an emergency session, announcing sweeping reforms. Ranger was awarded a medal for bravery at a ceremony in front of City Hall, the crowd cheering as the dog licked Ryan's face and wagged his tail. But Ryan's thoughts lingered on the children, on the cost of silence and the fragility of safety. He stood on the courthouse steps, Ranger at his side, watching the town come together. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Ryan knelt and hugged Ranger tight, whispering, "We did it, buddy. We really did it." Ranger nuzzled his shoulder, a quiet, wordless promise that he'd always be there, ready for whatever came next. In the days that followed the arrests, the town of Lebanon was a place transformed. The usual calm had given way to a mix of raw emotion and uneasy hope. Parents gathered outside City Hall, some angry and demanding justice, others quietly crying, clutching their children as if they could anchor them in a world that suddenly felt treacherous. Handwritten signs appeared on the courthouse lawn, "Protect our kids, never again," and taped to the daycare fence a single line, "Thank you, Ranger." A candlelight vigil grew on the steps of St. Anne's Church, flames flickering against the stained glass windows that had watched generations pass through Lebanon's storms and celebrations. Volunteers read the names of missing children. Some returned, some still out there, voices trembling in the night air. Ryan stood in the crowd, hands in his pockets, Ranger at his side. Feeling the weight of every story, he saw Megan, standing with Denise and her family, tears in her eyes, a survivor's strength in her spine. The children at the heart of the storm, Mason and Harper Lynn, were finally reunited with their parents. Their mother's sobs had broken through the sterile quiet of the hospital as she clung to them, whispering apologies and promises. For the first time, Harper Lynn spoke, her voice no louder than a whisper, reaching for Ranger's fur as if it were a lifeline. Mason followed her lead, answering a nurse's gentle question with a nod and a small, tired yes. It was a beginning, fragile but real. Local news followed every step, broadcasting interviews with parents, officials, and experts in child safety. There was a hunger for answers, for explanations, but also for hope. On a sunny afternoon, the town held a ceremony on the courthouse green. The mayor, humbled and subdued, handed out certificates of appreciation to Megan and Denise. When it was Ryan and Ranger's turn, the crowd surged forward, applause echoing off the buildings. Someone started a chant, "Ranger! Ranger!" And for a moment, it felt as if the entire town was breathing again, united by gratitude and the smallest flicker of pride. Ryan stepped to the podium, Ranger sitting perfectly at his feet. He cleared his throat, the microphone squealing slightly. He spoke not as a cop, but as a neighbor. "I know a lot of us are scared, angry, and maybe feeling like we failed to protect what matters most. But I also know this. It was the instincts of a dog, the courage of people like Megan, and the persistence of this community that brought the truth to light. We can't erase what happened, but we can promise each other to never look away again." A hush fell. Then Megan stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "This isn't over. Not for the kids who are still missing, or the families still healing. We need to stay vigilant. We need to trust our instincts, even when it's uncomfortable. And we need to look out for each other every day." After the speeches, townsfolk approached with hugs and thanks. Children surrounded Ranger, some shyly reaching out to pet him, others pressing hand-drawn pictures into Ryan's hands. One crumpled drawing showed Ranger in a superhero cape, standing guard over the playground. The local bakery donated treats for the kids and a special bone-shaped cake for Ranger, who wagged his tail in approval. Yet, underneath the celebration, pain and uncertainty remained. Not all wounds could be closed with applause and promises. Ryan felt it late at night, sitting alone on his porch, staring at the moonlight pooling on the empty street. He knew some folks blamed the police for not catching things sooner. Others feared the worst was still to come. Even the children's parents, so full of gratitude, looked haunted when they thought no one was watching. For Megan, the aftermath was a strange new world. She was hailed as a hero, but she still jumped at every knock on the door. She started seeing a counselor, working through the guilt and fear that clung to her. She threw herself into advocacy, helping to set up a town fund for child safety improvements, background checks, training, anonymous tip lines, and plans for a new, secure community center. Denise and other officers volunteered to help teach local kids about safety, building a bridge between police and parents that had long been missing. As for Ranger, he became a fixture in the community. He visited the school, letting nervous first graders pet him, while Ryan talked about good secrets and bad secrets. He sat quietly by Harper Lynn and Mason at their therapy appointments, offering a gentle nuzzle or warm weight when words were too hard to find. Through it all, Ryan felt the town's scars begin to knit, one small act at a time. He knew the work wasn't over. In quiet moments, he thought of the names still unspoken, the pain still hidden. But he also saw the difference. Parents watching out for each other, teachers asking harder questions, neighbors volunteering at the community watch. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. On the night of the vigil, as the crowd drifted home and the candles flickered out, Ryan walked Ranger down Main Street. The town was silent, wrapped in the peace that follows a storm. Ryan looked down at his partner, his hero, and whispered, "Good boy." Ranger's tail thumped, and for a moment, under the soft light of Lebanon's street lamps, hope felt like something you could hold in your hands. In the wake of the arrests and ceremonies, Lebanon began to exhale, if only in small, uncertain breaths. The weight of the past weeks lingered, but the town was beginning to remember what hope felt like. Even so, for those closest to the trauma, healing was far from simple. Ryan found himself back in Dr. Morales's small, sunlit therapy office, a space he'd first entered out of desperation after returning from Iraq. Now he was here for another reason, to make sense of what this case had unearthed in him. He spoke of the children's silence, of the tension that still knotted his shoulders, of Ranger's loyalty when nothing else seemed certain. He talked about the guilt he'd carried for years, the survivor's ache that came with making it home when his brother Mark hadn't. "I keep thinking about those kids," he admitted, "and how close we came to missing them. How many times did I almost miss something, just because it was uncomfortable to look?" Dr. Morales listened, her questions gentle, steering him toward self-compassion. "Sometimes we only find purpose when we're tested. You listened, Ryan. That's what matters." Later that week, Ryan sat in a circle of folding chairs with other veterans at the VFW hall, sharing coffee and hard-won stories. For the first time, he found himself telling the group not about war, but about Ranger, how the dog's instincts had led him to trust what others dismissed, and how working the case had forced Ryan to confront parts of himself he'd kept locked away. He admitted to the group how much he doubted himself, and how much it meant that the community had rallied, that he'd found the courage to push forward. Heads nodded around the circle. Others shared their own moments of struggle and hope. Meanwhile, Megan threw herself into her new purpose. Her phone buzzed constantly, calls from local parents, nonprofits, and even news outlets asking for her advice or presence at events. Instead of shying from the spotlight, Megan decided to use it. She launched the Harper and Mason Foundation, a new advocacy group focused on child safety, trauma recovery, and support for at-risk families. She met with city officials, school principals, and even the mayor, making sure real changes would come from what the town had suffered. The foundation's first big project was funding therapy for Mason, Harper Lynn, and other children affected by the ordeal. Megan visited the hospital every week, sometimes just to sit quietly beside the two kids, other times reading aloud while Ranger curled up at their feet. Over time, with gentle encouragement and Ranger's calming presence, Harper Lynn began to talk. First to Ranger, then to Megan, and finally to her parents and a therapist. Mason, ever watchful, followed, finding his own small words. Laughter slowly returned to the hospital room, and color returned to their cheeks. Ryan and Megan's friendship deepened through these weeks. They met for coffee at the bakery, shared walks with Ranger through the park, and exchanged late-night texts when old fears returned. Sometimes they spoke about the case, its twists, the people it had changed, the wounds it had revealed. Other times they talked about everything else: family, dreams, what it meant to start over. There was a comfort between them, a sense of being understood that neither had found in a long time. For Ryan, progress showed in unexpected moments: sleeping a little better, trusting his instincts without second-guessing himself, and letting others help when the weight got too heavy. He continued to work with Dr. Morales, opening up more about Mark, about combat, about the feeling that Lebanon had become a second chance not just for the children, but for him too. The foundation soon organized a community fair, part fundraiser, part celebration, and part group therapy for a town eager to reclaim joy. Balloons bobbed in the late spring breeze. Food trucks lined Main Street. Ranger wore a blue vest marked Official Hero and let dozens of children pet him, his tail wagging like a flag. Megan and Ryan took turns at the dunk tank, raising money for the new Child Advocacy Center. Mason and Harper Lynn, shy but grinning, watched from the safety of their parents' arms, waving at the crowd. It was here, surrounded by laughter and the smell of popcorn, that Megan made a short speech. She thanked the town for believing her, for believing in the children, and for showing that real community meant facing hard truths together. She asked everyone to look out for one another, to remember that listening and acting could save lives. The crowd cheered, a different kind of applause than before, less frantic, more settled, full of real hope. As dusk fell and the crowd thinned, Ryan found himself walking with Megan and Ranger beneath the glow of streetlights. They talked quietly about the future, how Megan wanted to go back to school for social work, how Ryan was thinking of adopting another rescue dog to train with Ranger, how both of them felt a little less alone in the world. "You know," Megan said, pausing under a blooming cherry tree, "I used to think people were either broken or whole, but maybe it's more like we're all a little bit of both. And maybe that's okay." Ryan smiled, the simple truth of it settling over him like a balm. "Yeah, maybe that's exactly what makes us worth saving." They walked on in comfortable silence, Ranger leading the way, Lebanon's lights glowing soft and new in the distance. In the darkness, the wounds of the past remained, but so did the promise of healing, for the town, for the children, and for the people who had chosen, against all odds, to step into the light. The weeks rolled into months, and with each passing day, Lebanon slowly reclaimed its heartbeat. On the surface, life resumed its familiar rhythms: kids running through parks, neighbors waving from porches, church bells tolling across Main Street. But beneath the everyday normalcy, something fundamental had shifted in the town's soul. For Officer Ryan Carter, it was a time for hard questions and deeper truths. One Sunday morning, Ryan sat at his kitchen table, sunlight spilling over old case files and half-empty mugs of coffee. The town was quieter now, the chaos replaced by a fragile but persistent hope. Ranger rested at his feet, head on his paws, eyes half closed but alert to every subtle change in Ryan's mood. The German Shepherd had become more than just a partner. He was a living reminder of the instincts that had saved 2 children, and in many ways, had saved Ryan too. Ryan opened his battered journal and began to write, words coming slower but clearer than before. He wrote about trust, how it was easy to lose and hard to rebuild, how the case had forced him to listen not just with his ears, but with his heart. He described how the silence of Mason and Harper Lynn mirrored the silence he'd once carried home from war, the way trauma had curled itself around him and made every day a battle. He paused, remembering his brother Mark's voice, Never ignore your gut, Rye. It's there for a reason. For so long, Ryan had doubted himself, afraid to act on intuition when facts were thin. But it was Ranger's relentless warning at the daycare that had shattered that hesitation. If he'd ignored it, if he'd chosen comfort over instinct, the children would have been lost. The thought haunted him still, but now it also empowered him. Sometimes the smallest voices and the keenest noses could see what everyone else refused to see. Throughout Lebanon, others were learning the same lesson. The school board had instituted new protocols, mandatory background checks for all employees and volunteers, anonymous tip lines, and regular safety drills. Churches and community centers opened their doors for after-school programs, making sure no child slipped through the cracks. The Harper and Mason Foundation blossomed under Megan's leadership, supporting not just survivors, but families at risk, and providing therapy and advocacy for anyone in need. The story of the daycare case had gone statewide. Ryan found himself invited to panel discussions and workshops on child protection, always bringing Ranger along. The dog became a mascot of vigilance and resilience. Kids would rush to greet him, some shy and trembling, others bold, all drawn to the gentle hero who had saved lives simply by refusing to be ignored. In group therapy, Ryan listened as other veterans shared their battles with guilt and silence. He spoke openly now about how the case had forced him to confront his own demons, the sense of powerlessness, the isolation that grew from not being able to protect everyone. He was honest about the setbacks, the nightmares that still visited, the moments he found himself unable to breathe when the memories crashed in. But there was pride, too. He told the group how following Ranger's instincts had brought him back to himself, reminded him of the power in simply showing up, refusing to look away, refusing to let the story end in darkness. Megan became more than a colleague or a friend. She and Ryan grew close, sharing meals, walks, and the kind of late-night conversations that stitched together trust. Sometimes they laughed about Ranger's sudden fame, how he'd become the face of the foundation, how he'd even gotten fan mail from as far away as Oregon and Texas. Other times, they held each other quietly, knowing that words weren't always enough. The connection between them was real, built on the fires they'd walked through together. Lebanon changed too, in small but powerful ways. Parents watched each other's kids at the playground. Teachers became more attentive, learning to spot warning signs. Even the town council, once divided by scandal and mistrust, seemed committed to transparency. At town meetings, people no longer shied from hard questions. They asked them boldly, demanding accountability, determined to make sure nothing like this could happen again. Yet, Ryan knew, healing was not a straight path. There were setbacks, relapses, moments when old fears reared up in new ways. Some residents still whispered about the scandal, about who should have known, about blame and shame. But for every bitter rumor, there was a story of redemption. A neighbor stepping up, a child speaking out, a survivor reclaiming their voice. One autumn afternoon, Ryan took Ranger to the new memorial park, built on the grounds of the old daycare. Children laughed as they raced through the grass. Parents lounged on benches beneath fresh-planted trees, and a bronze plaque honored all those who protect the innocent, seen and unseen. Ryan sat on the edge of a sandbox, watching Mason and Harper Lynn build castles, their parents chatting nearby. Megan joined him, her presence warm and familiar. As the sun dipped low, Ryan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He looked at Megan, at the children, at Ranger dozing in the shade. He realized that trust could be rebuilt, not by ignoring the pain, but by facing it together, one day at a time. He closed his journal with a sense of completion. The story wasn't just about stopping a crime or punishing the guilty. It was about refusing to be silent, about finding the courage to act when everyone else froze. It was about redemption, not just for the children, but for Ryan, for Megan, for Lebanon itself. Even Ranger, once an abused rescue, had found his place as a hero. Looking out at the park, Ryan thought, maybe that's all any of us can do. Keep listening, keep believing, keep showing up. The rest would follow. As laughter and sunlight filled the air, the meaning of family, trust, and survival felt changed forever. For the better. Change, the real kind, moves slowly. But in Lebanon, it was undeniable. By the first warm days of spring, reforms that once seemed like wishful thinking were becoming everyday reality. What began as a crisis had transformed the town, leaving behind a scar, a reminder of how deep denial can run, but also a blueprint for how a community can rise when it chooses to face the truth. At the center of it all were three people and a dog. Ryan Carter, Megan Price, and Ranger found themselves, sometimes reluctantly, at the heart of town meetings, parent circles, even state summits on child protection. Every time Ryan saw his own face or Ranger's on a flyer or the evening news, he felt a jolt of humility, knowing the true work happened in moments away from the cameras, quiet choices to do the right thing, even when it was hard. The first major reform was a new, rigorous licensing system for all childcare providers. Mandatory background checks, random inspections, trauma training, and anonymous whistleblower lines. Police and child services joined forces for routine safety visits. Churches and nonprofits stepped up with after-school programs and free mental health counseling for any child or parent in need. Megan's Harper and Mason Foundation became the glue for these efforts, helping families navigate red tape and making sure no call for help went unanswered. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the new park, built on the old daycare's lot. There was no forgetting what had happened, nor should there have been. Instead, the memorial garden stood as a promise. Lebanon would not look away again. It became a place of laughter, play, and remembrance. At the center of the garden was a statue, not of a politician or a founder, but of Ranger, bronze cast, standing alert and proud, watching over a circle of children at play. Below his feet, the inscription read, "Trust your instincts, protect the innocent, never be silent." On the day of the park's opening, the town gathered beneath fluttering banners and soft spring sun. Mason and Harper Lynn ran ahead, giggling, their parents waving as Megan, Ryan, and Ranger made their way to the front. Ryan felt a warmth he'd thought he'd lost forever, community, belonging, and the kind of pride that comes from weathering a storm and seeing the sun break through at last. The mayor spoke first, acknowledging the pain and courage of the past year. "We failed to protect our most vulnerable," he admitted, "but we will never make that mistake again. Today, we honor the heroes among us, those who refused to stay silent, and those who trusted their hearts, human and canine alike." Applause broke out, the kind that comes from a place of deep, shared relief. Megan took the podium next. Her voice, once trembling, now rang clear and steady. "Real change," she said, "means more than rules and reforms. It means learning to listen, to kids, to parents, to our own doubts. I learned the hard way how dangerous it can be to look away. Now, thanks to this town and to Ranger, I know what happens when we choose to act instead." Ryan was last to speak, his words simple but heartfelt. Sometimes you find yourself in the right place at the right time. Sometimes it takes a dog to remind you to trust your instincts. But real safety, that takes all of us. Keep your eyes open, your heart soft, and your courage sharp. That's what makes a difference. After the ceremony, as laughter and music filled the air, Ranger pranced from group to group, letting every child touch the medal he wore on his collar. Megan hugged Ryan, their friendship, and maybe something more, etched in every shared glance. Denise snapped photos, grinning as the town's hero dog licked ice cream from Mason's hand. But even as Lebanon celebrated, the message was clear. The work wasn't done. There were still children out there in other towns, other states, who needed someone to notice, someone to care. At a statewide summit on child protection, Ryan, Megan, and Ranger shared their story, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a call to vigilance and hope. Their session overflowed, police chiefs and lawmakers scribbling notes, social workers wiping tears from their cheeks. When a reporter asked what advice he'd give to others, Ryan didn't hesitate. Never assume someone else will see what you see. If you feel something's wrong, say something. Sometimes, the only difference between disaster and rescue is one person paying attention. And never underestimate the power of a dog's nose or a child's silence. Megan added, "You don't have to be perfect. Just be present. Listen, act, and support each other. We all have a part to play." As spring ripened into summer, the ripple effect spread. Neighboring towns adopted Lebanon's reforms. More resources poured into child advocacy. The Harper and Mason Foundation gained national recognition. And Ranger, retired from active service but still a local celebrity, spent his days running free in the new park, always surrounded by children and laughter. Ryan sometimes sat on a bench beneath the statue, journal in hand, watching the world he'd almost lost and helped save. He reflected on how trauma and pain could spark not just despair, but redemption, if people dared to face it, together. He thought of Mark, of all the children who'd been rescued, and those still waiting for help. And he knew he would never again ignore the instincts that had guided him from the start. In the gentle dusk, as families packed up picnics and children waved goodnight to Ranger, the park glowed with a quiet promise. Lebanon had changed, but not just through tragedy, through ordinary people refusing to give up, through courage found in unlikely places, through the smallest voices refusing to be silenced. If you've ever doubted the power of paying attention, of acting on your instincts, or of fighting for what's right, remember Ranger's story. Remember the children whose lives were changed because one dog barked and one town listened. Stay vigilant, trust your gut, and honor every hero, human or animal, who chooses to care, even when it's hard. And as the last light faded from the sky, Ryan watched children chase fireflies around Ranger's statue, laughter ringing out across the park, and knew that sometimes the world really could be remade, one brave act at a time.